Hi everyone, Ian Aldridge from Progressive Legal. Today talking about the threats internally and externally to a business for their intellectual property, and what are the most common threats for a small business when it comes to intellectual property. And you might be surprised, more often than not it doesn't necessarily come from external threats. Sometimes some of the biggest threats to a business, just like a business generally, is internally. So potentially partners of the business or directors, employees of the business. These are sort of all the internal sort of components of the business that can sometimes be of a threat. And you as a business owner have got an obligation to the business and the shareholders. It might just be you, but you've got an obligation to the business and the shareholders to make sure this intellectual property is secure as much as you legally can, and taking adequate steps to make sure that it is secure and that it stays secure in the business. And that can be anything from your pricing structure and your all the things that from an intellectual property perspective you've worked really hard and would consider it a trade secret, essentially, that if someone was to leave the business, have a think about if an employee was to leave the business or a business partner was to leave the business with all this intellectual property, they could literally set up next door the very next day with all of that information that you've worked so hard to create, and then set up in competition with you and start to take business away from you, and leverage off all that hard work that you've done and money that you've spent in developing all this, and paying employees to develop this, and paying contractors to build some of this stuff. And it could be code for the website, could be ideas about new product generation, could be trademarks themselves, business names, logos, taglines, slapline, bylines, etc. So it's really important to make sure that you start to think about this as a business owner, especially after a few years in business and realizing, hey, we're actually amassing quite a lot of intellectual property in this business. We need to make sure it's secure, that there are adequate procedures and processes in place, that there are policies that are very strict, and make sure that everyone is aware of them. Having intellectual property provisions even in your employment contracts to make sure and spell out exactly what the intellectual property of the business is, including but not limited to this, and make sure that there are consequences if they breach that confidentiality. If they take that intellectual property, then there are severe consequences for that. And we find a lot of businesses don't spend enough time making sure that in their employment contracts, that these things are very, very specifically covered, and that restraint of trade provisions are very well set out with cascading clauses to give them the best chance of being enforced, as well as non-compete and non-solicitation. Can't pinch clients, can't entice other employees away from the business. Without these things in place as a business owner, it's really, really dangerous, and often it's too late. It's the horse is really bolted afterwards, and unfortunately we have to advise many businesses of how to potentially change things after an event has happened, and potentially the damage is done. Potentially it can be fatal for a business. That's how bad it can be. Not to scaremonger too much, but we just see it happening so often in a business, and businesses not realizing how important it is to have these things in place. Even with contractors that are doing, work for the business, they're even more of a threat because they don't have the obligations that employees have to you at law, and anything that they create, essentially they own unless it's assigned to you. And that's one of the things that it's forgotten a lot, and most people don't understand that even if you pay a contractor to do a certain amount of work for you, just because you pay them for it doesn't mean that you own the intellectual property that they create, unless it's in a contract, it's enshrined in the contract, and there's an assignment of intellectual property. So I hope that helps. There's just a few things that business owners need to really take care of, and we advise every day on it. So if you need us to have a look and give you some advice on it, please feel free and reach out. Thanks.